Okay, we're here with our last lecture video for at least for me for the populations section. This section is going to be about genetic changes in populations. We have a couple of vocab words here that we're going to kind of discuss. The last four, polygenic, normal distribution, direction selection, stabilizing selection, those we won't be really seeing much. In fact, we're going to be skipping these. It's something I used to teach a while ago, but we're going to learn what an allele is, a phenotype, Hardy-Weinberg principle, gene flow, non-random mating, and genetic drift. These are kind of ways that things that affect populations. So jumping into it, we have to cover just a little bit about genetics and how genetics kind of works out. The first thing we're going to find here is an allele. An allele is one of the many alternative forms of a gene that determines traits. Um, you have many alleles, and at least you have, and you always have two alleles for each trait. Sometimes they code for the same trait or the same possible trait. Sometimes they code for different things. So just in the case of eye color, um, possible alleles that you may have would be blue, green, brown eyes, hazel. There's a lot of different variations in that gene, and all of those are considered alleles. A phenotype is the actual trait that you show in your body. So even though you might have a brown and a blue allele for your your eye color will be brown, so that is your phenotype. And once again, these are just detectable characteristics that result from your genes. Now, alleles come in different varieties depending on how likely they are to be expressed as your phenotype. There are dominant alleles and recessive alleles. A dominant allele is the allele that will be expressed, it's going to be expressed as the organism's phenotype if you have it. So in our eye color situation, brown is the most dominant allele color. So if you have just one single brown allele, you will have brown eyes. Recessive alleles are alleles that are only expressed in the absence of the other dominant alleles for that trait. That is like the trait for blue eyes. You will not have blue eyes unless you only have blue eye alleles. So there's just a smaller chance that you actually get blue eyes because you have to not have blue. I'm sorry, you can't have brown or green alleles for you to show blue eyes. And we'll skip that question for now. We'll actually have a little bit of a lab business on the question right down here where it says, do you think if a population is under no selective pressure, the dominant allele will take over the population? We'll look at that. Okay, as we progress onwards, we're going to see a few of our other vocab words here. All right, allele frequencies, they don't change in populations unless there is some kind of evolutionary force acting on the population. The idea was actually proven in 1908 by a mathematician named G.H. Hardy and a physician named Wilhelm Weinberg. With their last names combined, we get the Hardy-Weinberg principle. This idea basically says the frequency of alleles in a population do not change unless evolutionary forces act on the population. So if we had a population of species that just lived without any kind of trouble and no worries in the world. They had food, they had ample space, they had no predators. We would actually see that the amount of alleles, the percentage of alleles in that population would actually be pretty constant. Um, if you think back to the natural selection simulation with the white and brown rabbits, if you put a brown mutation in there and just let the rabbits reproduce without having any selective pressures, you would see roughly the same percentage of brown and white, even though they are reproducing quite rapidly. The evolutionary forces that can cause a change in the allele frequency are as follows. There's 5 of them. There is gene flow, mutation, non-random mating, genetic drift, and natural selection. Natural selection and mutation should be familiar. The other 3 will take a bit more of an in-depth look at them, and we'll see them kind of played out in the labs as well. All right, so let's get some of the ones we know already out of the situation here. Mutations occur very rarely within populations, only occurring about 1 to 10 times every 100,000 cell divisions. But because we're made of billions and billions of cells, that does happen kind of often. And when these mutations are passed down to offspring, we see some pretty interesting things happen. And when we have a mutation in a population, what mutations do is they add a new allele, a new trait into that population. And depending on whether that trait is beneficial or harmful, we might see that trait survive to the following generation and actually maybe spread due to natural selection. This is a picture I have on here that I don't know if it's an actual mutation, but the other 2 are. This is called dichromatic eyes, when you have 2 different eye colors. You see it in animals. People can have it too. And over here you have a zebra that has just a very different pigmentation. All right, gene flow is a newer one that we're going to talk about here. Gene flow occurs when individuals migrate in or out of a population. This essentially happens whenever we have animals essentially move. It's a very simple idea. The addition, we can define it as the addition or subtraction of organisms that can add new genes to the population or remove significant amounts of an allele from a population too. We'll look at some of these little diagrams here. We can see how when we have a couple of populations, we can easily have a gene frequency change just by animals moving around. If we consider the blue and the red populations here separate, and somehow two red individuals make it to the other side, we're going to be going from 100% red on this side and 100% blue on this side, to probably somewhere around 90% blue and 10% red. Because of the fact that the allele percentages just changed in that population is a breakdown of the Hardy-Weinberg principle, meaning that gene flow is an evolutionary force. Here we see another example where we have tan deer moving over a mountain range into an area that has brown deer, causing the allele frequencies to change on this right-hand side. So gene flow simply occurs when there's immigration or emigration, things moving in or out of a population. Another factor that can cause changes in the allele frequency is non-random mating. This is a situation in which individuals prefer to mate with organisms that live nearby or are of the same phenotype. This kind of mating can sometimes cause inbreeding. Inbreeding is not the best. It causes increased chances of expressing recessive phenotypes, and because recessive genes are sometimes not good, it means that you might have some genetic disorders based off of this inbreeding habit. Some examples of this in nature include situations like this. These 2 birds here are birds native to Africa. They are the same species, believe it or not. And as it turns out, this bird species, the females prefer males that have these long, elegant tails. So you will see females breeding with the same males over and over. This non-random mating, this selective preference that the females have in this population will slowly and gradually change the population to having longer and longer tails. In addition, Animals that have courtship displays, like some lizards and birds, will also have this non-random mating business where subsequent offspring will have better displays or better organs for showing off in the hopes of finding a mate. Okay? Genetic drift is our final new way of changing allele frequencies. Genetic drift is very simple. It occurs because of random chance. In small populations, it's more likely to occur. Random events like landslides or forest fires or volcanoes or just other natural disasters, they might just wipe out a section of a population. And not because that population is bad at surviving, just because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. Because genetic drift, this can cause a population to just shift wildly in favor of one trait over the others. Not because they were better at surviving, but because they just got blown up or some other thing like that. Here we can see there's an example where some dude decides to step on some beetles. Out of chance, he steps on green beetles, causing the population to go from about 33% green and 66% brown to a much smaller number here. We're down to 7, so about 14% green and 86% brown. Random chance just happened to crush green beetles. Once again, this can be more drastic in small populations because it's easier to wipe out larger percentages of a small population, causing genetic drift to happen very, very quickly. Our last one we should be very familiar with at this point is natural selection. Just to cover this really quickly, natural selection will cause a change in Hardy-Weinberg frequencies, the on-changing allele percentages, by changing the number of phenotypes expressed in populations by eliminating unfavorable traits. This will cause traits like traits that are bad to drop out of the populations in subsequent generations, and traits that are more helpful will be more common, such as the dark gray. In this situation, you can see how the population quickly becomes much more gray instead of white, because gray probably helps them camouflage themselves a little easier. One last section we're going to talk about here is gene persistence. There are recessive unfavorable alleles that, if those alleles are ever expressed in an animal or organism's phenotype, is not good. And despite the fact that these traits are not good, they are still around, which is interesting because you would assume natural selection would take those out. We're going to look at why that is in a lab a little bit later. One example that I'm probably going to have you guys research a little bit here is, name escapes me. The name is hemophilia. It is a negative recessive genetic disorder which causes your platelets in your blood to not clot effectively. Essentially, any kind of bruise or cut for someone who has hemophilia can be life-threatening. The picture over here is of a person's thigh who has hemophilia. This large miscoloration is a bruise that is essentially doesn't stop bleeding. These people have a hard time stopping bleeding. They internally bleed a lot. If they get cut, they bleed for long periods of time. And this was actually common in royal families such as Russian, German, British, and even French. The people in those families would only marry other royal-blooded people, causing this inbreeding factor to make this more common. We'll be seeing more opportunities to research this a little bit later. After this video, you should be looking at the lecture quiz, and there'll be more to follow. Best of luck.